Hey, thanks for tuning into my podcast. This is Big Head on the Block, hosted by me, Tim Henderson, aka Big Head. Welcome back, and I want to thank everybody for listening to my first podcast, Coffee with a Serial Killer. I'm going to give you some insight now in this podcast on the beginning portion of my career, which was with the East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff Department at the East Baton Rouge Parish Prison. So for 18 months, I was assigned as a deputy and was responsible for overseeing inmates. To give you an idea of what that's like, I'm going to give you the lead into exactly how I got this job. Late 89, I was looking for a different career path. I had military experience, and I currently was working at the LSU Vet School. I didn't really think that there was a good career path at the vet school as far as financially. So a friend of mine, Ray Levine, who retired as a lieutenant from the sheriff department, told me that I could probably get hired with the sheriff department and, be stationed at the prison. So I went and filled out an application, had an interview. They selected me, and the day I was there, they told me, we're not able to give you a tour of the facility, which is normally what they do. They give you a tour of the facility so you can kind of see what you're getting yourself into. However, they were busy that day with visitation, so they put it off. I started a few days later, and when I started, I didn't have a uniform. I didn't have any equipment. I showed up in a pair of blue jeans, a polo-type shirt, tennis shoes, and went to roll call with the rest of the deputies. Everybody else had uniforms because obviously I was the only new guy. During the course of the roll call, they gave everybody their assignments, and it was pretty intriguing, to be in such an environment, kind of wondering, what the hell's going on, because it is a prison, and although I've seen the inside of a jail cell, I've never seen the inside of an actual prison. So we got our assignments. They stationed me on A wing with a recently retired deputy, Ken Jackson, who's still a friend of mine. So I followed Ken to A wing, and to give you an idea, it's A wing is a Department of Correction line, and it's where inmates are housed prior to them going to DOC. So they're basically either a waiting time to go to DOC, or maybe they got brought back from DOC for trial. So as we approached A wing, and of course, this is a whole new environment to me. I'm looking around, I'm like, man, this is a lot to absorb. And as we get to A wing, Ken takes me to one of the lines. A wing has 4 different lines. 1, 2, 3, and 4 is how it's numbered. A, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So he brings me to A1. I believe it had 20 people in that particular cell. And I think they might have had 8 or 10 cells that double bunked, and then they had a common day room. Well, when the deputies are making the rounds, there's something called a catwalk. And the catwalk basically is an area where the deputy can move freely without actually interacting with the inmates physically. So when you're making your rounds, you have the option to go into the cells with them or to go on a catwalk. Ken took me to the catwalk. He slammed the door behind me. So I hear a big metal door slam. I don't know, it's probably 8, 10 feet tall. So I look back at him thinking, I don't have any instruction. I don't have any training. What the hell am I supposed to do? So I just stood there. And at that point in time, the inmates realized that I was new, because obviously I didn't have a uniform, and I was in Jabot jeans. At the time, Jabot was a hot style. And that was the only kind of jeans that I had. So I wore my Jabot jeans and had a polo shirt on, and I became all of a sudden the object of their obsession. They kept telling me how sexy I was and all the things that they were willing to do or have me do for them. And I'm looking at them like, okay, how do you answer a grown man that's telling you these things? I knew I was cute, but I didn't realize how sexy I was until that particular moment in my life. And that's a joke. These guys knew I was a new guy, and they were basically hazing me is what they were doing, kind of giving me a prison break-in, if you will. So I stood there and looked at him. I was about 6'3", 215. I was in good shape, and I'm not really oversensitive. So I just looked at him, tried to look mean, had me a flat top, kind of muscular. And I just looked as intimidating as I could, but didn't respond to him. After a few minutes, they got tired and went on about doing whatever it is they normally do during the day. About that time, I looked back behind me, and I seen Ken's face plastered on the window of the door with a big grin, and he's laughing his ass off. I don't know who the other deputy was with us that day, but he got a good kick out of it too. So Ken finally opened the door, and he walked me out, and he was laughing at the time, and I was like, well, that was an experience. And he said, hey, you did pretty good, man. Being the FNG or the fucking new guy, I guess I passed the test. A lot of people would have left right then and there because it was pretty intimidating. It was almost like being in the lion's den. Although they couldn't get to you, it was still something that I had never experienced. And from what I understand, there's a lot of deputies that come and they'll stay an hour or two and then they'll leave and they'll never come back. They'll just quit. And I'm guessing that's why they probably didn't hand out a uniform to me prior to me starting the job. Next, I want to tell you about a lesson I learned, a valuable lesson. Not only respect, but actually putting somebody on the spot. When I first started the Parish Prison, we didn't have any radios or anything. We had a pair of handcuffs. We didn't have batons. We didn't have pepper spray. You got to go way back to 1990. Nobody had any equipment other than a couple hands. You had your verbal skills and you had a pair of handcuffs if you needed them. But most of the time you were outnumbered anywhere from 20 or 75 to 1. So I don't know what good one pair of handcuffs is going to really do. However, we have a hall man named Carl Lewis. Everybody knew Carl in the prison. He was sometimes violent. He was notorious. He was a hustler. He was a guy that had been incarcerated his whole life. He pretty much understood the prison system. So he asked me to be my hall man. And for those of y'all who don't understand the concept of this, a hall man is kind of like the guy who comes out of the cell. He stays in a confined area, which in this particular area, you have A wing and B wing. Each of them have 4 cells. So there's A 1, 2, 3, 4, B 1, 2, 3, 4. And then there's a control cage in the center of this where a deputy's housed, and he can manually open and close the gates. So the hall man, we usually let him have free access to this whole area, mop, sweep, clean if we need supplies, mattresses, just whatever supplies, toothbrushes, whatever these inmates need. The hall man's kind of a go-to guy, and sometimes we'll send him across the prison to another area, because we know who he is and where he's going and why he's going. So that being said, Carl Lewis, notorious Carl Lewis, he had a very deep voice and he never could say my name right. And for those who watched the Little Rascals when they were little and remember how Froggy talked, this is how this guy talked. Now, my last name is Henderson, but he couldn't say Henderson. And this is how he talked when he said my name, Deputy Henry. So he called me Deputy Henry because he couldn't say my last name. And he asked me to come out on the hall. I'm sure he had something to do. He had to hustle, make some kind of little game. No telling what he had on his mind. I told him I couldn't let him out because I had too much going on. So he got mad and he's like, let me out. And I'm like, dude, I'm not letting you out right now. I got too much going on. I can't. And he told me that he was going to fuck me up when I let him out. I had to let him out to go to chow in, a brief hour or two. I don't remember. But I heard what he said. I had been out with him. He had free access to me anytime, really, because we just walk around together a lot. And I make rounds on each of the lines. So I didn't put a lot of thought into it. This is a valuable lesson that I learned. When I went to let him out for chow, he was in the 20-man cell, like I said. I locked the catwalk behind me, so there's one big long hallway once they come out of the cell to walk down. Then there's another big long hallway, and then that opens up into the control cage area where there's a deputy. So there's really nobody in shouting distance if I have any problems. I don't have a radio, as I told you before. Don't have a radio, don't have anything but just one pair of handcuffs. I opened the door, let them out for chow. They started funneling out, and what I didn't realize is they were stopping in the first hallway and not going to the next one. At that point, it was 20 of them, all DLC prisoners. Like I said, Department of Correction, they had time for doing felony crimes. So they're all in the hallway. Carl Lewis comes out. He turns around, and I'm standing there with the door locked behind my back because you don't want these inmates to be able to walk freely behind you. So, they're all in front of you. At that particular time, Carl lifted his hands up, and he kind of started pointing at me, and he said, "Bitch, I told you I was going to fuck you up." And he said it like this, "Bitch, I told you I was going to fuck you up." Because that's literally how he talked. And I didn't realize it at the time, but the next thing I told him put him on the spot. I said, "Hey, man, don't put your fucking hands in my face." At that point in time, he had 19 other inmates behind him, and they're all watching this. I can't holler for help. I'm on my own. I can't fight 19 people. I felt good fighting him, maybe 2 or 3 of them, but nobody can beat 19 people up. So the next thing I told Carl was this: don't put your fucking hands in my face. At that time, he took his hands. He didn't put them in my face, but he hit me in my chest and he poked me twice. And the lesson I learned is this: I put him on the spot, and now he has to defend his integrity as a tough guy by responding to my challenge. The lesson I learned for myself is this: you put people in that predicament, they're probably going to lash out at you. As a young cop, I hadn't figured that out yet. So I'm calculating like, okay, what's my next move? What's my next move? So the only thing I could do to save face for me is say, okay, motherfucker, you got it. We'll take care of this whenever y'all come back from chow. That was the only way I could de-escalate the situation without it accelerating into a major fight. And who knows what could have happened. 1 on 20, odds ain't good in anybody's favor. So they went to chow. They came back. I pulled Carl Lewis out, and we had a good long talk. And he respected me from then on, and I respected him from then on. And I will say this: Carl Lewis had done a lot of damage to supplies, to structure, and to other deputies. He's one tough son of a bitch. But he and I never had any more problems after that. The next thing I want to get into is something that most people don't know about me. I posted it on Facebook not too long ago, maybe a week or 2 ago. My father was killed in a police pursuit. However, he was a civilian. The bad guy who was running from the police killed my father and his friend Vernon. So Glenn and Vernon were killed. The driver of the vehicle that killed him is Tracy Malloyd. One day I come to work. I'm on a maximum security lockdown. They're either there for protection or because they committed acts of violence against other deputies. His particular line only had 7 people. As I'm walking down the line, I'm looking at everybody saying cell 1, John Doe, cell 2, blah, blah, blah. As soon as I get to cell 6 or 7, I see him. I know what it looks like because I've seen him in court. Tracy Malloyd. And I look and I was like, Tracy Malloyd? Oh, man, nice to have you here, man. Now, he had just received time for killing my dad. He got 2 counts of vehicular homicide. I don't remember how many times. I think they gave him 2 5-year sentences and ran them concurrent, which meant that he would only have to do half that time, and then he would get out earlier for good behavior and stuff like that. Well, at this moment, okay, what would you do? The guy who killed your dad standing there, you have 100% access to him. So I'm looking at him, and I'm like, So I walked away, and remember, I told you I was young. I was probably 22 at the time, full of piss and vinegar, and not really caring about long-term strategies here. I walked back to the control cage, and I told one of the older deputies that was working back there with me, I said, bruh, these motherfuckers put the dude who killed my dad on my line. It's a lockdown line, and I obviously have free access to him. All I have to do is open the gate, and it's just me and him. And I told the deputy, a few other things. And yeah, I mean, I had it on my mind. I was gonna bring some harm to this guy who wouldn't have at least thought about it. So I was like, man, I can't believe they put him back here. So I got 12 hours now to think about this. Well, good thing this particular deputy was seasoned and he understood. He called the rank structure, didn't tell me. The sergeant walked down there and he said, hey, man, we're going to move that guy off your line. And I said, why are you going to move him? I didn't want him moved. I can tell you that. But I understood why he was going to move him. So they had a few deputies escort him to the other side of the prison. And the sergeant told me, hey, I wanted to thank you for being professional and not doing anything. And I was thinking under my breath, yeah, well, I probably was going to do something. I just didn't have time. Looking back on it, I'm glad that the deputy called and told him that, because obviously I would have got myself in a lot of trouble doing what I had on my mind to do. And the funny thing about him being in the prison is I didn't really broadcast to anybody other than a few friends of mine that he was in the prison, and he was the one that killed my dad. So one day I'm walking down the hall on another side of the prison, and he's out as a hall man. And I see the deputy, and I said, hey, man, why you got that guy out on the hall? And he tells me, he just got him out because, he thinks he's a good dude, and he's just letting him have that freedom. I said, look, man, that guy killed my dad, and another guy, he don't need no freedom. He needs to have his ass back in that cell, because a hall man is a privilege in a prison. So me and the deputy exchanged words. He didn't really agree with my assessment of it. But after a few minutes, I convinced him that it was probably in his best interest to put the guy back, because I was pretty pissed off about it. And he never came out again, as far as I know, to be on the hall. A couple of months later, I'm walking down one end of the prison. I hear a deputy. And so sometimes these inmates, you can't see them from the control cage area. So he was on a line that had 4 different cells, and it's probably about 50 or 60 people total in all of them. And it wasn't my line, but the person kept hollering, deputy, and he hollered it so many times. I said, let me go back there and make sure, everything's all right, nobody's hurt or whatever. So when I approach, he sees me and I see him, and he turns to walk away, and I'm like, hey, bro, what you hollering for? And he's like, never mind. I said, no, never mind my ass. You hollering for deputy, what you hollering for? And he said, I was going to ask him for some Tylenol because I have a headache, but I ain't going to worry about it, man. And I said, well, I'll tell the deputy you wanted that, but let me ask you a question, man. You think my dad could have used some Tylenol when you killed him? You broke his neck. How bad you think his head was hurting at the time? So he just walked away because he knew I was pretty mad, and it's intriguing that these encounters kept happening because I was never housed. He was never housed in the area that I was particularly working. I switched shifts months later, and they have some inmates doing some work. The lieutenant says, hey, can you take that inmate over there and go get 10 mattresses to put in a new cell, because they were fixing to populate a new cell. And I look at the inmate, and who is it? Tracy Malloy, my dad's killer. I said, boy, ain't this some ironic shit? I keep running into this guy. So the area we had to go in was a big room, and there was nobody else around. He thinks that I'm going to attack him, which I really want to, but he keeps looking over his shoulder when he's bending down to get the mattresses. And I said, hey, man, what you keep looking over your shoulder for? You scared? He didn't really say anything. And I said, just to let you know, if I was going to hurt you, I would have already done it. Looking over your shoulder ain't going to help you. Ain't going to stop it. Get the mattress and do your job. So we went on. And the moral of that story is this. I had to do what my inner being was telling me not to do. I really wanted to hurt this guy. And I think anybody listening probably understands why. If you know me, you understand I'm not scared. Throw them hands, and I'm not scared to bring violence upon you if it's necessary. So that being said, he walked out of the prison intact, and I never actually did anything to him, which is probably a good thing because it allowed me to become a cop, to raise my family, and to and have a good career. Next lesson this was a valuable lesson. You always got to pay attention when you're in a prison environment. A lot of people, let me give you a little backdrop. So in East Baton Rouge Parish, anybody that gets arrested is taken to the East Baton Rouge Parish prison, where they're either housed, they're allowed to bond out, or they're given time and maybe they're sent to another facility later, like Department of Corrections, like we talked about. So people that come into the prison, sometime they might stay an hour, they might stay up to 2 years, I believe is the maximum that they can typically stay. As a jailer or prison deputy or guard, whatever you want to refer to, you're living in an environment where you're always outnumbered. You don't have any equipment that can help you. If you happen to get in a fight or something else occurs, you'll be lucky to even have another deputy even see what's going on, because a lot of times you're on the line by yourself. 35-man cell that opens up to one day room, so it's you and 70 people. You have to learn how to get along. In the 90s, I was working a 70-man cell. They had 1990, 91, I don't remember what year. They had two TVs, and the inmates didn't care about watching baseball, but I did. I wanted them to put one of the TVs on the LSU baseball game. And I said, look, here's the deal. The phones get cut off at 10. I'll leave them on till 2, but I want to watch this LSU baseball game. That was when LSU was beginning to win, and as you know, in 91, they won the World Series. So I was at work. I was making my rounds. I was in the cell because they wanted us in the cells at the time. So I was able to keep up with the game and, monitor LSU's road to victory. But the lesson that I learned is this: you can do your job, you can be fair, but when you're in their environment, sometimes you have to give a little to get a little. And I let them stay on the phone a couple of extra hours to talk to their loved ones, because there were so many people. It was hard for them to make phone calls during the day. It's a lot easier now, but back then they only had one phone on each side, so 70 people and 2 phones. So it was hard for them to use the phone. So it was a privilege for them to be able to use the phone, but it was a privilege for me to be able to kind of monitor the game while I was, during the course of my duty. Another valuable lesson I learned, and I tell you about all these lessons to let you see what the prison experience is like, but a lesson learned at the prison is one I didn't have to learn on the streets. It all goes back to respect. It's always about respect in a prison environment. There was one occasion where an inmate on a 20-man lockdown cell, he used to tell me he was going to fuck me up all the time. He was going to beat my ass. He always used to say, Henderson, you think you tough, man. I'm going to fuck you up. And I'm like, well, it's just me and you on the line, because there's 20 men that are locked down. So when I open his cell to give him freedom to walk, take showers and everything, it's just him on the line. So when I'm making my rounds, we standing there right next to each other. And for about a year, I kept telling him, hey, bro, anytime you want. He was about same size as me, 6'3", about 2. He was about 200. I was about 215. He was a tough guy. He was back there for beating up deputies, and I think he actually broke one of the lieutenant's nose, but that's an unconfirmed story. Fast forward several months. Same guy comes to the medical tank. I'm working the medical tank, which is an area where people come for like medical call if they're hurt or they need to see the nurse. I think he came up there to use the phone because he said, Henderson, I need to use the phone. He wanted to use the free phone in central booking because maybe he didn't have money on the books or whatever. I don't know. But I told him he couldn't use it right now, that people were on it. He asked me a couple more times and he got mad and he said the same thing he's always said for, the last year, how he was going to fuck me up. And a lot of times, even though people think that we are adversaries, a lot of times, it's just like two dudes just talking shit to each other. And he talked and I talked back. But this particular day, I let him use the phone. About an hour later, he gets off the phone. He comes back into the medical tank area and he looks at me, and I'm calling. At this point in time, we did get radios. I'm calling on the radio to tell him to shut the door behind him. And at that point in time, he lowered his shoulder and he rammed me. He grabbed me around the waist and rammed me into a desk behind me. I hit my emergency button as I dropped my radio on the desk. He and I began fighting. It was a pretty even fight for a little bit. Like I said, we didn't have any other equipment. I didn't have no batons or nothing. So he was throwing fists, I was throwing fists. After a few minutes, another deputy happened to just walk through, and I had him pinned to the ground, and the other deputy helped me handcuff him. Right when we were handcuffing him, he hollered, "Henderson, I told you to quit fucking with me." I didn't realize at the time why he did that, because he's the one who started. He lowered his shoulder on me. We wound up putting him back in the medical tank. My sergeant came down there and said, you need to go ahead and arrest him for what you're doing. But let me ask you something. Pender said that you was fucking with him and you started it. And I was like, okay, really? With all these other people, there's 1,000 prisoners in here. You think I'm worried about Gerald Pender, that I'm going to start a fight? I said, well, why would you think that? Because he said it. He said to me, the nurse said she heard him say, "Henderson, I told you to quit fucking with me." And that right there just showed that people that are institutionalized and live in that world, how smart they are. This guy said something out loud to direct attention away from him and make it look like he was the victim and I was the aggressor, when he was the one who lowered his shoulder and attacked me. He just got mad because I got the better of him, and he didn't want to get in trouble. Now, I had never arrested anybody because I had never been to any of the classes to know how to do that. They said, "We want you to arrest him for what he did." I didn't really care. It was over for me. It wasn't like it was the last time I was going to see this guy in prison. I'm going to see him walking down the hallway at some point in time. So they said, "No, you need to arrest him." Another deputy came and showed me how to fill out the paperwork, and we made the arrest. The lesson learned there was this: never underestimate an inmate's moods. I don't know what kind of conversation he had on that phone and why it was so important for him to get up to that free phone. So always be on guard, because they got 24/7 to think about what they doing, how they doing it. I took for granted that the 1,000 times before he threatened to whoop my ass or he wanted to, he never did. But that particular day he did. So when you're out there, especially those of y'all working in prisons, be respectful, but understand they can be volatile at any moment. A prison environment, especially when it gets hectic, is almost like a pride of lions going against a pride of hyenas. It's really tense. You can typically tell something's fixing to happen on a large scale when you feel that tension. One particular day, there were 20 inmates refusing to go up because their TV was broken. They had 2 deputies working that line, so it was 2 and it was 20. These guys came they went to chow. None of them had flip-flops on. They all had their tennis shoes on. I was working another line, but I could see them in there. So I told the deputy that was working the control cage, I said, "Open the gate and let me in there." It was 2 on 20, and I figured 3 on 20 would make it a little bit better. Odds wasn't in our favor anyway, but 3 is better than 2. So these guys were walking around. They took their shirts off, and like I said, it was like a pride of lions and hyenas facing off. All you could hear was them chattering. "Oh, we're going to fuck y'all up. Y'all better get our TV. Oh, we're going to fuck y'all up." I'm just standing there looking. Now, when you're in an environment like that, you got to hold your own. You can't let them think that you're scared. You can't let them think that you're weak. You got to let them feel like you're capable. But the one thing you don't want to do is to let them circle you. So I was standing in a position where they couldn't get behind me. The lieutenant actually walked down there. They talked to the lieutenant. He said, "Until y'all go into the cell, you're not getting a TV." Well, that prompted them to buck up a little more, if you will. Out the corner of my eye, I see somebody pushing somebody, and one of the deputies was getting into it with an inmate, and I quickly went over there. Luckily for everybody involved, the inmates and us, it was just a couple shoves. Eventually, they went in the cell. We got the TV fixed for them. It was not that big a deal. But be cautious. Understand your cues. When you see inmates walking and they all have tennis shoes on, they letting you know something's up. If half of them got flip-flops on, it might just be a little small beef. But when they all got tennis shoes on and they all going to chow or maybe to the rec yard, then you got to understand that trouble's looming. And you feel it. You feel it in the air. Now, the last story I'm going to tell you is kind of comical. I hadn't been there very long, probably 2 or 3 months. Nah, probably not even that long, probably 2 weeks, 2-3 weeks in there. I was bringing my lunch because, back then money was tight. I brought a sandwich in a Ziploc bag, a bag of chips, and a can of pineapples because I was still trying to eat good, and that prison food will fatten you up. A lot of people don't realize it, but those guys that come out buff in prison is because they're eating that fattening prison food and they're allowed to work out. However, I brought my lunch in a little small brown paper bag for those who are old enough to know what that looks like. I was working a 10-man lockdown cell. This was a maximum security line at the time because these inmates were extremely violent to correctional facility staff. I walked down the line, checked everybody in, made sure everything was good, took my food and put it up on the windowsill outside of the catwalk, which is the area that, as I explained earlier, they can't get to unless you allow them on the catwalk. So you got 10 lockdown cells. If I open up any cell, they have 4 or 5 feet or more to walk freely, and then they can walk up and down the corridor. My food was not in reach of anybody. I had come back intermittently, but when I came back this particular time, I was ready to eat. I picked my bag up off the windowsill. I was really confused because it was kind of light, and I knew what it felt like when I put it there. So when I opened it, I see an empty Ziploc bag, no sandwich. I see an empty bag of chips, no chips. I see an empty can of pineapples, no pineapples. These motherfuckers had got all my food, ate it, and put it back on the windowsill. Now, being so new, I didn't really know the concept of the abilities that these prisoners have. So what I learned a couple of days later, one of the guys said, "Hey man, you want me to tell you how they got you?" He said, "You know what they did, huh?" And I'm like, "I ain't got a clue. I know they got my food, and I still, to this day, can't figure it out." And he said, "They fished it, man, and they got it, and then they got it back up there." So let me explain what fishing is. In the prison system, people use string, any type of string, and they'll have a little weight on the end. So if they need to get something, they'll throw it, and they'll just keep dragging it back. So what they did, they threw it. They probably had something heavy on the end of the string, threw it, got my food, drug it back, ate it, and I'm guessing they probably just tossed it because they were still all in their lockdown cells. None of them had moved, and no other guards had been there, so I knew it had to be them. I just didn't know how the hell they did it. So they threw the food back, or the empty bag, and they made it back on the windowsill. So that's how I got. Valuable lesson. Don't leave your food where they can get it. But understand, they got 24/7, right? 24/7 to get you. They always thinking of an angle. They always thinking of a way. The last thing I'm going to tell you about my prison adventure is this. 7 deputies got arrested for either entering contraband into the prison or for making deals on the outside of prison. And the story goes like this. I'm at the office, the main office downtown, getting a new uniform shirt. And it's late in the evening on a Friday. A guy who I knew was a ranking officer or a ranking deputy, Bud Connor. He was pretty high in the food chain. He had taught us a class. You know, he's a pretty stern guy, pretty menacing when he looked at you. And as I'm standing there waiting for the girl to give me a new shirt, he stops and he starts staring at me. I'm thinking, okay, after a few seconds, I'm thinking to myself, what's this motherfucker staring at me for? And he just kept staring. Finally, I looked at him again. You know, I'm not trying to make eye contact because, you know, back then I'm a subordinate, so I'm not looking to engage him in conversation. I'm just trying to get me a shirt. He says to me, "Hey man, what's your name?" I said, "Tim Henderson." He said, And he just looked for about 10, 12 more seconds. And then he just walked away. He never said nothing else. And I was like, what the fuck's wrong with this dude? I woke up the next morning, got the newspaper like we used to get back in the day, walked outside, brought it inside, opened it up. They had an article about the deputies that were arrested. My best friend was arrested. He was one of the ones. And I'm thinking that he thought maybe I was either one of the ones that they were going to arrest, or maybe he had seen me on some surveillance or something and just kind of recognized me. My friend wound up going to jail. And so as a young cop, as a young prison guard, the moral of the story is don't let these guys tempt you. They got 24/7 to convince you. They convincing, they criminals. A lot of them are really good criminals. A lot of them are sociopaths. A lot of them are real good liars. They can convince you that the $300 they're going to give you, and believe me, $300 was a lot back then. is worth you taking a chance on bringing marijuana in or some other type of drug. All these lessons were valuable to me when I transitioned to the street. Everything I learned about respect, about their mannerisms, about the criminal element, benefited me in my career much more than anybody would ever know. The people are resourceful in prison 24/7. They thinking of ways to get you. You there 12 hours for the most part. Most correctional facilities or parish prisons work 12-hour shifts. So half of your life you in jail with them. So you got to be smart when you work in these jobs. Transitioning to a street job, you take all the elements of things that you've learned and you incorporate that into your new career. One last thing about the prison is this. You learn a lot about human behavior, human interaction. Most people think that guards know everybody's charges. Guards don't care everybody's charges. Guards have a job to do. They get there, they make sure that everybody's accounted for. They make sure that everything is structured. So structure is the most important thing. Knowing everybody's charge is irrelevant. You had to interact with them the same as the next person. Everything was structured. And if you treat one inmate different because you know that he killed somebody, then you opening yourself up to an attack. You treat everybody the same till they make you not treat them the same. You don't put your hands on them unless they make you put your hands on them. All right? It's a simple equation. But learning how to interact like that, when you transition to a street cop, you should use those elements that you have learned about human behavior and how to interact. Use this to your advantage in your communities. I hope this podcast gave you a little insight on what it takes to be a prison deputy or a prison guard or a jailer. Realize that it's one of the unsung jobs in the police department. A lot of people don't know about it and nobody wants to work at the prison, but it's a job that has to be done daily because there's a constant flow in and out of people. It's an important function of the law enforcement profession, one that people should be commended for doing. As we end this podcast, I want to talk about some future podcasts that are coming. We have episode 1, Coffee with a Serial Killer. But to expand on that, I have a retired homicide detective that's not only willing, but desires to come to tell the story of the hunt, the interrogation, and ultimately the incarceration of notorious serial killer Sean Vincent Gillis. So stay tuned for part 2 of Coffee with a Serial Killer. In the upcoming weeks, we'll drop that podcast. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Big Head on the Block. I'm Tim Henderson, the host. I look forward to dropping another podcast soon. Please give us any comments, likes, dislikes, or any topics y'all would like to discuss. Thank you.